Thank you guys all for coming out as a courtesy to your time as to coming out and joining us tonight. I think it's best to start on time, and any of the late stragglers will come in, they'll come in later. But first, I want to thank Charlie and the board and Adrian and all the people at Coral Ridge Towers that have invited us here to use their room. This evening, we're going to talk about ELSS and partial fire sprinkler, and we're going to have a quick agenda, introduce some people, and then we're going to open the room up for questions. If you guys need to see me, I'll be the moderator, so to speak. I'll come over and see you, grab you the microphone, and you'll have the opportunity to ask the questions of the people at the front of the room. So for now, my name is Tim O'Brien with Sprinklermatic. My business associate is Robin Collier. Gentleman in blue is Richard Brycecheck. He's with us. And most of you guys already probably know Chris McInerney. He's probably knocked on your door and introduced our firm to you. We also have Jeff Marsick, and the amazing Nova, who is responsible for doing all of this with us and getting you all here. So thank you very much, Nova. Jeffrey Marsick is with SLS, engineering firm that headed up the process for Coral Ridge Towers. Some of you guys are familiar with SLS. I'll introduce him and allow him to tell you more about SLS, and then we'll get started. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, there we go. As you said, I'm Jeff Marsick with SLS Consulting. We're a fire protection and life safety engineering firm. Really work as the consultants between the building and the fire department and helping them through this process. Tonight we're kind of going to go over a few things in the agenda. First, we're going to talk about how did we get here. Then we're going to discuss what it is an ELSS. We're going to talk about the components of an ELSS. We're going to dive a little bit more into the sprinkler system, the difference between partials and fulls. We're going to talk about the process. Then we're going to do a little bit about this case study, being this building right here. And then we'll save everything for the end for questions and answers. Sound great? Perfect. So I think I passed a few of these out. If everyone has one of these 11 by 17s, it kind of goes through an overview of the ELSS, and it's probably the easiest way to get everyone on the same page. So, prior to 1990, it wasn't really code for residential high-rises to have sprinklers put in at the time of construction. Right after 1990, that changed. Then in 1996, partially because the hurricanes that came through, there was a lot of rebuilding going on across the state. We had all these disparate building codes at the time, right? Tampa had their own code, South Florida had theirs, there was the Boca code. So the fire marshal said we need to create one standard uniform code across the state so wherever construction is being done, it's the same. And so at that time, they created the first Florida Fire Prevention Code. Right, they took two national standards and merged them together. In that code, it said that all residential high-rises had a fully sprinkler. Right, full sprinklers mean sprinkler heads in every bedroom, bathroom, and closet, which is the safest form of protection you can have, but it's also the most evasive and challenging to install. So we went back and forth in legislation until they really reached 2010 as the current precedence. In 2010, the state decided that you have two options. By December 31st of 2016, you're either going to commit to fully sprinkling your building, or you're going to opt out and do what's called a partial sprinkler, or opt out and do what's called an engineered life safety system, right? And to make sure that we could define what an ELSS is, they defined it in code, and you'll see that on your left-hand side of the paper. It says an engineered life safety system shall include any or all of the following. All right, so let's go through this. The first one's the partial sprinkler system. All right, we've done about 80 of these across the state. I haven't seen a building yet that got approved without a partial. Why? Because it's the safest form of protection. The ELSS is not an equivalency to the full sprinkler. The goal is to protect not the unit owner themselves, just like in a residential house, you're responsible for getting out of your own unit, but your fire should not impact the neighbor to the left of you, the neighbor to the right of you, above and down. So the idea is to sprinkle the means of egress, right, with the partial sprinkler so people can get out of their unit. Oh, can you remember what's over there? Stand right here. The second one is smoke detection system, right? Smoke detection in some of these condos means you only have a single smoke detector on every floor going up the building in front of the elevator, because that's already required, right? So part of that may be expanding your smoke detection to other rooms, such as the assembly room, or bringing them into the units. And it would be one smoke detector as a supervisory basis. The intent is that we're not going to fully sprinkler these units, but you want some type of early detection so we can alert people and get people out of the building faster. In the construction world, that's a scary term. Right? That means if you have a fire on the 15th floor, you're pressurizing the floor above, you're pressurizing the floor below, and exhausting the floor of incident. To do that in an existing building would be radically challenging. So the state has a minimum threshold. It says that if you're not a fully sprinklered building, you need what are called smoke-proof stair enclosures. Right? And If there was a fire in this room right now, we'd run out, blue sky, be safe, right? But in a high-rise environment, you have 10, 15, 20 floors, and even sometimes more than that, where if there's a fire on the lower level and those people are evacuating and opening the door, that smoke's going into that stairwell and hitting everyone in the face that's coming down. So the state requires what are called smoke-proof stair enclosures, and there's two ways of achieving that. Either you have a corridor that goes to an open-air vestibule and then into a stair, which that's the most typical architecturally type passive protection, or you do active protection, which is called stair pressurization. It's a scary term, it's really not. What it is it's a sprinkler or a fan on the roof of the building that when the fire alarm picks up smoke, it sends a signal to that fan, activates that fan takes air from the outside to put a positive pressure in that stairwell, so that when you open the stair door, the air blows out rather than smoke blowing in. Right? The idea is that we encase these stair enclosures in 2-hour fire-rated concrete, but the challenge is it's not fire that typically kills people, it's smoke. And the idea is that if you get into that stair enclosure, you should be almost as safe as being outside, and that's the intent behind pressurizing it. The fourth one on here is compartmentation. Right? That's a pretty simple one. Prescriptively, the code requires that every door that opens to the residential corridor has to be self-closing, self-latching. Meaning that if you open that door, you let go, it should close and click in. The reason being is that in a lot of fires, we don't think when there's a fire in your unit to run out and shut the door behind you. So the automated feature allows us to compartmentalize that fire, keeping that corridor, that means of egress, safe for occupants to escape and get to that stair enclosure. The fifth one on here is other approved systems. The way we look at it is we try to address what are prescriptive codes already you should be having to do, and then what are future codes coming into effect. One of those is this radio enhancement system. You may not have heard of it, you may have. What it says is that out of 9/11, the big loss of life was the firefighters, because they were told to evacuate the building. However, due to the construction, the signal couldn't make it through, so they kept going up when they should have gone down. So there was a federal mandate that went out, 20 states adopted, Florida being one, that says every high-rise in the state of Florida by the end of this year has to get tested for this emergency responder radio coverage. And if you pass, great, you have nothing to worry about. If you fail, you have to install what's called a BDA. It's a bidirectional antenna, or a DAS, distributed antenna system. Pretty much an antenna on the roof that will talk to the fire department, then uses coaxial cable to distribute the coverage to the areas of low coverage. If you fail your test, it's not that you have to do that as part of this ELSS. December 31st, 2022 is when that work's supposed to be completed by, and December 31st, 2020, or permitted by, and December 31st, 2024 is when it should be completed by. So it's just something to get tested as part of this, but it's not a challenge that you'll face up front. I think from here I'm going to pass it on to Robin to kind of go through the next steps.
Thank you. We're going to try to keep it as short and sweet as we can. Thank you guys for coming out today. My name is Robin Collier, Sprinklermatic Fire Protection. Been in business 32 years. Do a lot of new construction, high rises. It's kind of our forte. And over the years, we've just done a ton of retrofits and developing a process. I've met with some of the people here, and I think the key to the best installation, meaning a happy client, is the time frame that it takes to get in and get out. So to us, it's the process. Meeting with good clients, great relationship, everybody being reasonable, and pre-planning. And that's the biggest component to success. So not only the installation of fire protection, but all the things that come along with that. The patchwork, the coring, the marching up the building. There's a sequence of events, and that there's, I guess the most popular way of complying, right, is the partial fire protection system. That's what we prefer. Some people are asking me about full retrofit. I don't even think that's an option. I think that the partial fire sprinkler system is the best way to go about compliance. I don't think we can make you happy if we're going to try to provide full fire protection in all the units. CPVC or steel, that's the other question, right? So CPVC is the orange plastic pipe versus the steel pipe. It's a much quicker install, and as we were talking about just a second ago, it's the speed. So CPVC is less intrusive, you're not dragging machines. Some people are thinking steel is a better quality. That's not the case. It's a much faster installation. That's what we utilized here above the ceilings. If you look up, you see these round discs. These are concealed cover plates. All the piping is concealed above the ceiling. We work through the ceiling to install, and then the flat cover plates. we talk about the process, and the process is an approved ELSS report by the AHJ. Once that approval comes in, what we would do is convert your hand-drawn drawings into AutoCAD drawings. That would be the basis of our design to the municipality. We utilize that drawings in some components. Some of the hallways don't have ceilings in some of these buildings. This particular building did, which kind of, facilitated the installation. In some of the buildings, we don't have ceilings, so we're having to create soffits, and that's some of the work that we need to have subcontracted out. We need to be able to coordinate that with you guys. Adrian, would you like to talk a little bit about the installation and some of the things that we discussed up front, and the process that we discussed?
I could.
Okay.
I wasn't really prepared formally for this, but what I could do is just share some personal experience. And that is, I know we went through the same thing, probably as most of you are going through, trying to understand what the current requirements were, how they would impact us. In our particular case, to kind of cut to the chase, we, after considering all the information that we were subjected to and exposed to and we could find, we decided to go ahead and make the installation. It turned out to be much less intrusive than we thought. It turned out to be much cheaper than we had originally thought. This really has nothing to do with the contractor, so to speak. This is just our inside information that we had considered early on. We had interviewed probably 4 or 5 contractors extensively. I visited locations. I visited their facilities. Obviously, we visited Sprinklermatic's facility. They came to us. They made extensive investigations of our building. They researched our building, gave us their best plans and their best ideas. And we kind of learned from all these contractors that came to us. We talked to Sprinklermatic first, but we continued our conversations with others to better educate ourselves, since we aren't really in the sprinkler business, hadn't had any exposure to the sprinkler industry or business prior. So we educated ourselves the best we could. And our big fears had to do with probably what all yours might be, and that is, okay, we arrive at some sort of agreement and understanding about what the system's going to cost, and then we're going to be inundated with change orders, and this isn't exactly what we thought, and by the way, the fire marshal decided he doesn't like this, he wants that, and on and on and on. It just kind of scares you, in a sense, away from even wanting to consider it, because change orders can be, it can be quite...
More than the contract, right?
It can be more than the contract, I guess, to say. In any case, in our experience, we ultimately made the selection of Sprinklermatic for a variety of reasons. The confidence we had when I saw the facilities were absolutely superior to any of the facilities that we had visited. Many other companies tend to be franchises, so they state that we're nationwide, or that we cover all these number of states, but what they have is they've got a facility here and a facility there that are franchise facilities, and each facility has their own set of workers, or they import workers from the other facilities. In Sprinklermatic's case, when I went out there, they have a very substantial facility. They have training. They train fire departments. We watch their instructional videos on YouTube and all of their information they put on a regular basis. The design is done on site. Fire pumps are handled on site, and so they have a good experience with those kind of things. The installations that people are trained on site. Anyway, all these things we took into consideration. And here again, I don't really want to be promoting Sprinklermatic necessarily, but these are just the results of our investigation. Anyway, with that information and with the final negotiation of our contract, we signed the contract, entered into the relationship, and from that point forward, it turned out that the installation was far less intrusive than we had expected. It was much cleaner than we had expected, way faster than we had expected. As a matter of fact, just as a kind of a side note, we had obviously had an assessment to cover the cost of the sprinkler system. And we said, well, it's going to take them forever to do it, so we'll just let our people pay on a monthly basis, and we'll collect it over 12 months. And Sprinklermatic came in, and they were just rushing through the whole building and changed our whole timetable for payment. That's more of an inside little bit of humor, than anything else. Obviously, we covered it and everything else, but it was just interesting that it changed the dynamic of how we collected money and how we paid and everything else. Anyway, here again, the installation, much less intrusive than we had thought, much faster than we thought, much cleaner than we thought. We coordinated certain things along with them. We made certain that we had our own people on the floors that these guys were working on. Number one, to ensure that nobody would make any accusations that were unfounded toward the contractors and their people. We made certain that doors were open. We had keys ready to go so that we could open every single door as required. It turns out in our particular installation, given that the penetration was only above the doors in each apartment, there was minimal penetration into the units, maybe 2 feet at the most. The people never really had, in most cases, even had themselves, the workers, to enter our units by more than 1 or 2 feet to accomplish the install. I made certain that we had our plasterers, wall people, able to follow these guys down when they made a hole. Once they got off the floor, we patched, we cleaned, and it made the whole installation very fast, very clean. And of course, like I said, we had our people there to ensure that, number one, there was security. Number two, the doors were immediately available because we had all the keys to the doors. And the installation proceeded that way, and we're very, very happy with the outcome. We had not one change order. I think there were some changes that came to pass that we became aware of. We had to put some sprinklers in a couple of places we didn't expect, like the fire wells and things like that. But Sprinklermatic recognized that that was, what was required. They did it. We never heard a word. Our contract was for X number of dollars at the beginning, and X number of dollars is exactly what we paid at the end. There was no discussion about handling it any other way. In a couple of the cases, I think we had a picture broken or we had some paint spilled or whatever. Sprinklermatic took care of it, wrote the check for the resolution, which was very minimal in every case. Our people were actually praising the guys. Our people were making cookies for them, for the workers in the field. And in every case, the comments were all very positive about the courtesy and the cleanliness of the working crew. And it just went on very well.
The partnership was the key to the success of the project. That having the subcontractors lined up behind us, having access to the units, we always talked about the speed. That was going to be the success of the project. And anytime that we had an obstacle, that we worked together in resolving it. And there's going to be issues. There's just reasonable people working together with a common goal. And that's exactly what we want, transparency. Easy documents. How about the contract? The contract was pretty easy also. The AAA document that's fair and reasonable on both sides. We gave you schedule values right up front. Try to disclose everything, talk about the issues before they happen, and try to predict human behavior. And we're going to have a couple issues, a couple hiccups, a couple bumps. But if you can forecast that and you can kind of foresee the obstacles, you can kind of, the rest of them were softballs.
I can tell you this, we had many projects going on at this time. Obviously, you see part of our parking lot right now continuing. So we had a paving project, the fire sprinkler project. We put new lights out in our parking lot. That was a separate project. We put new doors at the end of our hallways. And of all those contractors, I wish they were like Sprinklermatic. These are the only guys that didn't have to chase and ride herd on and everything else. Sprinklermatic was what was said was what happened. Robin alludes to certain issues and certain things that can happen, but in our case, we had none of those experiences. Not to say that you wouldn't, but in our particular case, we had very little issues we even had to discuss. And issues that we did have were settled in a single discussion.
I appreciate that. We pride ourselves in the training that we do, not only in CPVC installation, but we've actually created a sprinkler head simulator at our facility. We've got our own sprinkler university there in Davie. We encourage everybody to stop by, like Adrian did, do your homework. And that's going to be key to your construction project, in how you interview your contractor, how you vet your contractor. What we'll do is we have a sign-in sheet, and what we'd like to do is email you what the industry form is. It's an AA document, just like our contract. And it's how do you vet your contractor? How do you vet their qualifications? I lost this job 2 or 3 times. I remember talking with you. There were prices half as much, and trying to convince you that maybe those prices weren't legitimate. And as we educated and as we talked through some of those issues, some of those cost differentials became apparent. You know, and I think that we got to a certain point that we wanted to work together, and we negotiated a contract price that was reasonable and fair for both of us, and that we could be successful. So we would encourage you to vet your contractors, come out, see what we're about, meet our team. We're 250 people strong. We've got an office in Davie, born and raised here in South Florida, 32 years in business. We've opened up an office in Tampa this year and just expanding. So we'd love to have you out to the facility. Some people already have been out. We'd encourage any questions, you know. So we'll wrap that up, and we'll open the floor to any questions. Hey, Michael.
Hey guys, you guys have all met me many times, I'm sure. I've come by the doors and said hey. So you probably wonder who I work for. This is the guy right here to the left, Michael Sheehan. He's the owner of the fire protection and life safety firm, which is known as SLS. New construction is our bread and butter, but this is what we got involved with to help our condominiums, and it's been a great thing. Is there any questions we can kind of take at the moment? Yeah.
That tubing, did you say it was made of plastic of some sort?
CPVC?
That would be the preferable material. So we're
So
using,
my question is, how fire resistant is the tubing?
it undergoes the same testing as the steel. And it's made by Blazemaster, which is a Lubrisol product, and Warren Buffett owns Lubrisol. So it's what we install in all these major high-rises, and it's a fantastic material. We use it in the majority of our retrofits.
We as a building, we're in Hollywood, and we came up here because we feel this is an important subject. We did an ELSS study with a certified engineer. What do you do as far as that study? Would you look at that study and then you give a quote on, so like what role do you play? Because again, we missed it, so I apologize if this is repetitive, as far as how do we get this thing started?
So we're just one part of the ELSS. As Jeff mentioned, we're going to install the partial fire sprinkler system. So there's only a couple variables. You have an existing water supply, existing fire pump, existing standpipes. We survey those items. We come through. We do an assessment of the type of ceilings, if you have a drop ceiling or whether you have an exposed structure. And really, we're going to tailor our estimate to your particular building, and then we're going to walk that building with you, and then make sure that you completely understand about the softening, maybe some of the things that we need from you in order to complete our work. And if we have a ceiling like this, we're working through the ceiling, we're terminating the sprinkler heads, no work. But if we go into the corridor and there's no ceiling, I don't think you're going to want exposed piping. We have one client that did elect to have exposed piping, so we can kind of work through that. But Sprinklermatic will provide you a price for a partial fire sprinkler system, trying to utilize all the existing components and then working and navigating and negotiating with the fire marshal and the fire department to try to keep costs as low as we can. Yes, sir.
I think you're next. For SLS, what we kind of fit in is you get your report, it's been approved, and now you need to go out to bid for it. So we serve as like your bid consultants, developing the technical bid documents, soliciting the contractors, helping walk the board through from soup to nuts. So
everybody, not just the sprinkler, everything else that has to be.
Exactly. And then be able to evaluate the pricing. As I had said, I think that when we stepped in, there were prices probably half as much as our price. And once we started to negotiate or navigate rather through the proposal and what was included or what wasn't included, our price started to go higher and higher and higher.
Dumb question, I'm sure it's been asked. Do you offer finance?
We do not.
That's a shame. I could use a few bucks. Hold that mic closer to you. Yeah.
There we go. Is it better?
You mentioned ceiling types being important in the process.
Correct.
With the ceiling of this type, and I see that the sprinklers themselves are hidden, did you have to, was this ceiling here when
The
you did
ceiling
this?
was exactly like we see it. What we like to see is we navigate through. So this particular ceiling has a reveal. There's a little bit of a reveal to the ceiling. The nice thing about plastic is you don't have to remove the ceiling. The plastic will deflect, go through the ceiling. So we're working actually through the ceiling grid. We're cutting it, we're gluing it, right? We pressure test in there to make sure that we have a solid system. Then we'll go ahead and pressure test that the piping.
So with the drop ceiling, you didn't have to remove the ceiling
not.
and put in a new
We
one?
did not, no.
Thank you.
So what we do is we keep our mains a certain size, the branch lines, so that we can deflect through the ceiling, which is
They can't.
critical.
You got to use a mic. They can't hear you down there.
Okay. So CPVC is critical to the installation, meaning when you have a ceiling like this, you're able to push the material up, the material will deflect. If you had steel piping, you'd be installing much smaller segments, which obviously more expense, right, because of the labor.
What about drywall? If drywall instead of this?
Well, if you have drywall, we're going to have to make holes, but typically you won't have drywall going down the corridors. Typically what you'll have is soffit. So what I normally see is an exposed concrete lid going down the corridor, and because of the ceiling or the lights going down the center of the corridor, it's much cheaper to provide two soffits, one on either side of the apartments, because once you get into that, and then you're always worried about the elevation, the aesthetics, right? So 2 box soffits on either side, you don't have to change the lights, which also would require lighting calcs, right? And then you're always worried about that elevation in these long corridors.
Man,
So that was a good point. So you have 2 different types of ceilings, really, fundamentally. You have drop-down ceiling, like this, where it's very quick, you can run it painless. Then you have, which many of these buildings are, concrete above, concrete below, meaning that you don't really have anywhere to run the sprinkler pipe, right? So from a code perspective, it sounds simple. You run the sprinkler pipe straight down the middle and tee off into the units. From an aesthetic perspective, that's a disaster, because now you have a coffered ceiling type look, right? So the common approach seems to be parallel runs going down the corridor, so you keep that balanced look throughout. And then while you're doing that, it's a discussion with the board and the building to say, well, what else do we need to be running? Do we have wires? Do we have cable? What can we put in that soffit that if we're going to put this up now, what can we look at and what's feasible? Because there is a limit to how much you can put. We ran into this on another job where once you pass that 8 by 12 threshold, now you have to have 2 sprinkler heads, one on the bottom, one on the side. So there's a discussion you really want to have up front before you move forward, so you have a vision of what it's gonna look like at the end.
I have a question, please.
And we've actually mocked that up at our facility in Davie, so if you'd like to see that, and you'd like to see what it looks like, the rough framing and the finished product, you can come in Davie and we'll actually show you what it looks like. We actually have sprinkler heads that we're discharging with solenoid valves, so we can actually show you what the head would look like, activating over the doorway, right, to create that water curtain that we talk about, and then also in the corridor. So if you right there in Davie Road Extension and Griffin Road.
What's the address of the Davie?
4740 Davie Road Extension, just south of Griffin Road. We've got a fire truck outside. You can't miss us.
He's got a question there, Rob.
You can do that with spring hinges, closers, there's all kinds of. Yeah.
The gentleman who talked about, I guess, this building, what's your position? You didn't say who you were and what you do here?
I'm sorry, my name is Adrian Peschel. I'm the general manager of this particular building. But I just want to say one last thing, because I had neglected to do this the first time around, and a couple of the questions made me think this might be important. First of all, for our building per se, along with the other buildings behind me, we had originally done this ELSS survey back in 2002, back when a lot of this stuff first came into being. And we were working with that old report. The report obviously was put away for a while, but as this action took root again, here more recently, 2010, 2011, 2012, we revisited this old report that we had from an engineer, in this particular case just happened to be from Miami. And we had called him to ask him to come up and review the report with us and see what the current situation was with this report and how applicable it may be to our current day situation, and whether or not we were looking at old methods versus new methods, and new thinking versus old thinking, or whatever. And when we spoke with Sprinklermatic and some other people initially, they had recommended SLS and suggested that perhaps we might want to talk to these guys about either revisiting our existing report and giving us a new report, a new survey of the building, because there may be some other ways to address some of the issues. One of the big stumbling blocks for us very originally was just the notion that we had to partition our hallways from the smoke, compartmentalize the smoke. The notion of putting smoke doors in the middle of our hallways, and because we're in a T shape as it is, to have these 3 somewhat ugly and not cheap doors in every single hallway for 17 floors didn't seem very attractive to us, either financially or aesthetically. And this really for us was a big stumbling block. We didn't really, this was one reason we weren't excited about moving forward. Anyway, to our pleasant surprise, we did go ahead, we did contract SLS to give us a new look, a new perspective, a new set of eyes on our situation. And what we found was that we could address the smoke issue, by pressurizing our elevators, pressurizing our stairwells. And in our particular case, the notion of putting an air handler on top of a stairwell or on top of our elevators, pressurize the elevators, and thereby have virtually no aesthetic effect on any of our hallways, not having to install expensive doors and all this, to compartmentalize the smoke, made the whole situation much, much more attractive for us. And so I really wanted, and you had somebody here had asked a question about already having an existing report and whatever. Well, SLS reviewed our existing report, but then came in and had done their own report, and there were many aspects to the report that we found to be a more desirable way to attack the problem and approach the problem than the report that we had done back in 2002. And then also SLS, working more in our area as opposed to Miami, more familiar with the mentality of our local, fire guys here. It's helpful because obviously the fire marshal locally, has some ability to influence the report and what they'll accept and what they won't, based on their interpretation of the codes.
Now, those are the sprinkler heads?
They are, yeah.
Wow.
They pop down. So that we can show you that at our facility also, but the cover plate drops off at about 135 degrees, and what that allows that to do is the actual sprinkler head comes down, and it'll actually go off at about 155 to 165 degrees. And these are the less obtrusive.
As well?
Yes, so we have several different types of sprinkler heads. This is a concealed type, more desirable for me, less impact to the building. We've got semi-recessed, some that protrude a little bit from the ceiling. You'll see those in the carport cachet when you walk outside. Because it's non-conditioned space, we have to utilize a semi-recessed head, because what we're trying to do is give a corrosion-resistant value to that head, so we don't have issues in the future. We're right across the street from the ocean, so that's a nickel Teflon coated head. And then what we have is a sidewall sprinkler head, and then most of the units, that's what you'd see in this particular facility, which is a sidewall sprinkler.
So if you run a line through your hallway, or both sides on the sidewall, how many heads do you need on the inside per unit?
A head over each one of the doors. So if you have an entry into the kitchen, and then also the entry vestibule. So depending on how many doors that you have leading into
So if it has one or two doors, one each door.
Correct. And then any of the HVAC closets, right? And then all the common areas.
Now our building, we have about 16 floors, well 17, but 16.
Okay.
And we have those old swamp coolers. If we were to go to an AC unit for all the hallways, would that eliminate having those power dampers? Would we close them off?
That's probably a question.
You know what I mean?
Say that again?
You know the dampers that are in the stairwells on both sides? We have just open dampers right now. Vents.
Inside your stairwells?
Yeah.
Outside.
Yeah, our stairwells have the vestibule, like you said, like a 3x3 or 3x4 vestibule. Then there's another door, a man door going into the stairwells.
Yeah.
And they all have automatic closers on them, the doorways. But on the wall, we have like a vent. It's about 4 feet by 2 feet wide, and they're just open vents.
Is it more of a design, or is it having an
This is old. The building's about 50 years old.
So what I recommend is, I'm always in the Hollywood area. I can come out, we'll take a look, and it's always, every building's, unique in its own way. So that's how we can figure that one through.
Anybody down here?
We live in a building which is 203 apartments and 27 floors high. It's a tower. The building is not long, it's just square, not very big square footage. My question is, how much approximately will cost the report for the engineer to assess the situation which we have now?
It's usually best to look at it on Google Maps to kind of get an idea. I would think somewhere in the ballpark for like 8,500.
Okay, so we can invite and to have more precise estimation.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. The second question is, will contractors provide scope of work, including the linear footage of the material used and every, cost of every steps the contractors is involved in?
Say that again?
So an estimate or?
Cost
what's it
of
gonna-
work, which for contractors, scope of work. Does that provide the information regarding linear footage, what material is being used, the cost of material and labor?
Every contractor will provide you with a schedule of values. That'll be broken out by labor, material for each floor, typically not broken out by unit. It can get as precise as you like. I just don't think that anyone's going to provide you a linear foot price per piece. That's pretty intricate. I think that it's given to you in a schedule of values, which is standard AIA document.
And that's at time of contract. When we're giving you an estimate, we're gonna give you a lump sum price, we're gonna give you a detailed scope of work. We typically don't give you quantity aheads. If we're doing comparisons, once we get down to the nitty and gritty, we can start to do some stuff like that. We're actually designing on the set of drawings that you give us, so we're not doing a guesstimate. We're doing a real linear takeoff, we're doing a real estimate. We know what these things cost, we know what it takes to get them done, right? And so that's what we would do, is sit down with you at that point in time and be able to.
So for the building 27 stories high, how much time in your estimation will be required for the engineering supervision?
I think that anybody that said to you in a room full of 70 people what it costs to do something would be telling you a complete lie and guessing. I think that for our benefit, I think we should meet more formally, walk the building, and discuss it in detail. I think that one thing that hasn't been said, and I've said in other meetings, is each one of these components, whether it's SLS's work or Sprinklermatic's work or HVAC, everyone's going to have a different item. This is all a custom suit. So if Jeffrey says $8,500 and it turns out to be $9,000, then he's a liar, right? So I don't think that cost is an appropriate conversation. I think that a meeting with a more detailed approach, we can get Christopher or Richard to come out and walk the building. I'm sure that Michael could have Jeffrey come out, and we welcome, candidly, that you get multiple estimates and multiple conversations, and then vet your contractor properly and compare value, not price.
Is there any need for audio installed in every bedroom, or is this required?
That's another good question, right? There's a lot of the components of the ELSS, when people talk about cost, it depends on how proactive the building's been, right? So if you did a fire alarm replacement probably before 2012, then you probably don't have the codes that came out in 2012 that said every bedroom is supposed to have 75 decibels of the pillow of a 720 hertz frequency, right? So that's why it's really unique per building on what your ELSS is, because there's factors architecturally in the building and there's factors proactively of how the building went through the process.
And you were asking a question about the timeline to generate the drawings, right? The shop drawings that you're gonna give us normally hand-drawn drawings, older drawings that we have to convert to a digital format, an AutoCAD format.
We already have those in digital format.
And once you give us that digital format to design a building like yours, 30 to 45 days to get a set of shop drawings together and get them to the city with full submittals, something along those lines.
And I'm talking about finishing the project all the way.
We need to look at your project, take a look, and really a lot of that has to do with you. We're going to give ourselves a much longer timeline than it takes us. How long did we tell you? 6 months, right? We finished up in about 3. So really it has to do with the relationship, the ability to get into the units, right? And then also the patchwork, the things that are required beyond just our scope, right? And we need to do a really good job in defining that to you, make sure you have that team. And if we're utilizing that time period while we're at the city, let's do a mock-up. Let's practice a little bit before we start, because the reality is we're really making cookies, right? So that first floor that we're going to do is going to take the longest. The second goes faster. The third, I mean, by the time we got to the top, I mean, we were racing through. It really became something really, really speedy. So a lot of that has to do with you. So.
We're all the support of the contract. Yep. So, okay, very good. Thank you.
From contract to start date, what is the turnaround currently about?
You know, I think that really, we just sit down with you. I mean, Tim, we could, Tim's operations. So
you asked contract to start date. So we negotiate contract back and forth. Your attorney's going to have some I's and T's, and then we're going to get to permitting. That permitting process, depending on your municipality, could take from 7 days to 30 days. So contract is not the appropriate answer. The permit,
They're in Hollywood, so
Okay.
Hollywood takes 30 days.
you're right, Hollywood's the best.
Every bit of 30 days. So what we would try to do is contact Janet, see if she'd be willing to do a plan flip, right? Run through the documents real quick. If she saw something that just jumped off the page at her, then we go ahead and make that modification. We try to get that in front of her. But in our experience, we've done some really large jobs in Plantain, or in Hollywood rather. She takes the full 30 days, regardless, you know?
Our goal is to expedite your project. No one in the building is going to be happy that we're there, right? I mean, as much as they were making us cookies, it's going to be interrupted. If you're on the board, you're going to get phone calls. You're looking to expedite it every turn. You know, if we can work, 5-10 hour days, we're going to do that. We're going to do everything we can to get into your building and get out of your building as quickly as we can. I heard a short anecdote the other day that some folks had come back to this building after obviously being away on holiday. They came back and they said to Charlie, when's the sprinkler system starting? And he said, it's done. And I said, we did our job right then. So I was very proud of that. We were less interrupted than we could. For me to show up and for people to be making cookies for my guys, I got to tell you, that doesn't happen anywhere. So they must have been doing something right.
Our ELSS plan is currently under review by our fire marshal, the local fire marshal. And we're anxious to get to the next step. It's been quite a while and we've been waiting for that. I'm wondering, what is the next step? I'm assuming that at some point we have to get someone to do formal specifications from the ELSS plan, and then we go out to bid.
What municipality are you?
Yeah, so a couple quick questions. Tell me
We're in Boca Raton.
Okay, so in Boca Raton, I would assume that you would have to get that off the fire marshal's desk signed. And then,
Clearly.
as Michael said, depending on who wrote that ELSS.
SLS did.
Okay, so Michael goes in and Jeffrey goes in, they meet with the fire marshal and they try to expedite that process, right? And if it's not happening, the people that are here, they're going to make it happen. They're hearing you say that, so I'm sure they're going to work hard to do that. After that, what Michael said, and I don't know if you have a property manager or if you have a building manager.
We do have a property manager.
So then you're going to look to your property manager or your building or a small owner's rep, and you're going to say, I'd like to put the project out for bid based on the documents that we have from ELSS. That is your prescriptive answer to what you need to do.
So we don't need to go to any kind of a drawing phase or a specification phase beyond the ELSS survey that's already been done.
I think you take on a lot of liability doing that. What we pride ourselves in is providing a design build proposal to you. So the more ambiguous it is on your end than putting it out, you put the responsibility onto the contractor and then choose the right contractor. It's a negotiation with the fire marshal, and it's good communication with the fire marshal. So it's sitting down up front, being able to get his attention, being able to have a working set of documents, and be able to negotiate on your behalf. It's not a perfect world. It's an existing building. You're going to have to be reasonable so that we can get these projects done. Otherwise, everybody will just push back, and that's not the intent.
And I think Tim said he's making cookies, right? Because he's the guy out here installing it and everything else, right? So on the front end, we're the guys who put the recipe together, right?
Right.
But until we put the recipe together and the fire marshal agrees to, what we're making, right? We really don't know quantities. We don't know how we're going to do it. We don't know.
So I'm asking
all the
what
details.
happens after the fire marshal has signed off on the plan that SLS submitted to you?
So generally what happens is us or somebody else, or you guys just might decide to take it on your own. But if it's us, we do a performance spec that basically outlines specifically what scope is in the sprinkler work, right? What's included, what's excluded, what are the materials we're using, what is that process? And the same thing happens for fire alarm and all these other things. The goal of that is to standardize it so that when you put it out to bid, it's
So I would ask, what does that phase cost if we go to SLS to do that phase?
I think Jeff can review that with you, but we can certainly get you that. So.
Okay.
Is the fire marshal here?
No.
Shut the door.
In our particular case, and I want to talk as we're all from the same family here, and we have the same interests. And not that anybody will necessarily agree with everything that we're doing here, but let me tell you the tack that we have taken in order to move us along. We have a lot of projects that we're looking at in the future in our building here. We're going to be air conditioning our hallways. We're going to be renovating our hallways and things like that. we knew that the most intrusive part of this ELSS thing was the fire sprinkler end of things. We knew when we came in, we have a full report from SLS. We have a full list of things to do, which includes some modifications to our smoke detector system, fire alarm system, mainly on the audible side of things, getting the right alarm tone and loudness, volume, and whatnot at the pillow level, like he said. Pressurizing our elevators and whatnot. However, we chose to look at our implementation of the system not as necessarily as one big package, that you have to do everything all at once. Because obviously that'd be fairly expensive and quite involved, etc. We chose to pick it apart. We chose to say, you know what, right now the big push is on putting in fire sprinklers. The fire marshal is pushing for fire sprinklers and he wants to see people cooperate. He wants to see good faith and all that. So we said basically, okay, we're going to show you good faith. We'll put in the fire sprinkler portion of it, which is the lion's share of the SLS project anyway. We're not going to worry about nitpicking, our stairways painted the right colors, and we have all these, handrails, and is our smoke detector system exactly correct? We're going to do fire sprinklers. We're going to do fire sprinklers right. We're going to put the fire sprinklers in. If anybody says anything to us, hey, guess what? We have fire sprinklers. We have the lion's share of the safety and everything else, not all this little nitpicky, stuff that comes along in this SLS system, which we obviously plan on doing at some point in time, but we're picking our time, we're picking our battles, we're picking how we're going to spend our money when we want to do it. But we know for a fact that nobody disagrees that the fire sprinkler portion, is the biggest, most important portion of it. And we believe that by meetings that I've sat in with the fire marshal, that by showing good faith, by doing this, if they want to, come down on us, we bought ourselves some number of years. Right now everybody's saying they need to see some progress by 2019. I mean, they like to see it installed. The whole system will never be installed anywhere by the end of this year, more than likely. But we did the fire sprinklers, we're installed. We just bought ourselves a lot of time. So that's the tack that we took, okay, as an association. And then next year we'll talk about pressurizing our stairways, and then the year after that we'll talk about maybe doing something with the fire alarm system. But for our board, our way of thinking, that's what we've done. So if you want to look at it as trying to implement the whole entire package at one time, and maybe make yourself crazy doing it, that's your prerogative. But that's the tack that we take. Right, wrong, or indifferent.
Would you say that phase is 60%, 70%, 50% of the total cost? Because it gets to the point if it's 75%, why not just do the whole thing?
So every building.
So no numbers, just percent.
Everyone, like you said, every building is different. That was a tack that we had chosen. We were happy with the price that we had for us to put the sprinkler system portion in. It was a manageable number for us, far less than probably a lot of people were thinking prior to that. And we were happy to do that part and move on with our life on some other projects and things that we have. But I just wanted to point out that in our particular case, because I don't want to be representing these guys in the wrong way necessarily. I want to talk to you as an association, person. And in our case, that's the route that we chose to take. You can argue whether it was the right way or the wrong way. Would be smarter to do it a different way. But right now, we got our fire sprinkler system in. We're probably the only building around there with a fire sprinkler system. We think it's made us safer. We think it's increased our property values. It's out of the way, and we'll do the rest as time moves on.
And then to answer your question, this is the most disruptive part. The sprinkler is the most disruptive part of physical work, right? Because it's work in hallways and it's disruption, right? We don't want to see them. It's sometimes getting in the unit. It's probably 90% of the disruption, if I had to guess, right? Cost-wise, it's probably, in every building is different, but it's probably 60 to 90% of the cost. So it's really the lion's share, like Adrian said.
So, Michael, you've got a question right here.
As your sprinkler pipe enters from the hallway into the unit, is the penetration 2 foot in, or is the sprinkler head flush with the wall and the penetration? How is that done?
I think that it's a case-by-case basis. When we took on this particular project, we tried to minimize the hole in the corridor. But what we realized was we wanted to minimize the work on the inside of the unit. So what we did was we actually had a single hole. We actually made the hole in the corridor a little bit bigger so we could look at 90 down into that hole, and basically we were fitting the pipe. So we actually made the hole on the wall inside the corridor a little bit larger so we could minimize the hole on the inside of the unit to make that smaller, and that worked out better for us.
But
It's flush.
Because now you're not working inside the unit, now the work is concentrated to the exterior, to the
the
common
sprinkler
area.
head is flush with the wall on the inside of the unit.
If you have an alcove, if you have a ceiling, it's going to be in the pendant position. If you don't have that ceiling, and a lot of times it's a plenum, right, that goes into the unit, you'll have that sidewall. So if you come out to our office, we can show you all three different types of heads. We can show you how they activate and how they're finished.
We need do we need an appointment to come out there, or just?
You can call, there's several people, you can see Noah, we've got all sorts of people that can walk you out there anytime. I can call before you come, or we can schedule an appointment.
We already have been connected with Sprinklermatic as far as their price goes. Now, the other areas, the pressurization, the decibel smoke alarms, the vestibules by the elevators if we need them or not, in the other areas, the communication system, do we go to SLS, who has already given us our proposal, to get the contractor to do each segment? Because I like what the gentleman said about doing each segment separately. Get the sprinkler systems, get the pressurization, get the vestibule, get the decibel meter thing, get the communication systems separately. We like that. We haven't thought about that before. But that will work financially, I believe, better for our unit. Do we go to SLS to find out the contractors to give us prices for each of the other segments?
You do come to us because it's every jurisdiction is going to be different on their approach to the implementation on this, right? So maybe Fort Lauderdale is accepting of the piece by piece versus another jurisdiction like Hollywood or Pompano would have a different process. You guys are in Pompano, and we're just kind of working through some of those pieces. So I think the best thing is for us to sit down and talk, and then when we kind of figure out what we want to do as a game plan, we then bring the fire marshal in to discuss with him what he's being accepting of, right? So that's one of the critical components here. It's really communication and process, and opening that line of communication up front can kind of help us dictate how we move forward with this.
Thank you.
And getting that signed off, getting that agreed upon is a necessary. I mean, you have to make sure that whatever agreement you're getting, make sure you get in writing, because you don't want to get started and have them come back and tell you something different. That's happened to us before.
Yes. Have you tested the sprinkler systems? And if you haven't, how do you know that they're working properly? And if you do test them, how do you do it without damaging all the apartments and so on?
So part of our installation is a vertical feed. So we actually tie onto the existing piping, the network of piping on the ground level that's fed from the street right through a backflow preventer to a fire pump. Essentially, we find a common place. In this particular building, we found a nice segment to go up in the stairwell. We have a drain. Every single floor has a control valve. Every single floor has a drain. Part of that drain assembly is an inspector's test. And essentially what you're doing is you're flowing a sprinkler head or simulating a sprinkler head, and you have a flow switch. So you have two electrical devices or alarm devices that have to get tied into your fire alarm panel. So basically, if anybody were to close the control valve, you have a tamper switch. It would actually enunciate at the panel, ground floor control valve shut. You'd want to make sure it was open, constantly open, normally open. Then what we would test also is a flow switch. So if somebody were to knock that head or you had a fire, it would actually enunciate at the panel also, giving you an alarm status. So that's part of this fire sprinkler system that's actually integrated into the fire alarm, and it's tested annually. So that's part of your inspection process once a year.
Part of the inspection process, but how do you know that if there's a fire that it's actually going to sprinkle right here?
Well, we've done it. The municipality comes through, they check the network of piping, right? It undergoes a 200-pound pressure test, and it has water on it. So
it does have water.
It absolutely has water on it.
Good evening. The deadline for putting in these ELSS systems with the sprinklers is apparently the end of 2019. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you have any idea in Broward how many apartments need this and haven't done it yet? And how many are you able to handle What percentage has completed this work of the sprinklers? Do you have any idea?
You know, we have a list that we're working with. I don't think that anybody can suggest that everybody can be compliant. We currently have 5 under contract. We've got 250 people that work for us. And I mean, the reality is, it's a negotiation with the fire department. You know, I think that what does compliance mean? We don't even know what compliance means. And I don't think that all the work can be done in that time frame. So we won't take on more than we can chew. You know, that we're really good at saying no. But I think that, you know, if you choose us, we have the ability to work you into our schedule. You know, I mean, our particular company, we're doing about $3.5 million a month, if that gives you any idea of our capacity. We've got 10 full-time designers. We can move mountains, you know.
I know from the municipality where I am, in Hallandale, they sort of indicated to us that as long as we get our ELSS report completed and approved.
Yeah, she is really reasonable, and she knows our firm. I mean, the reality, she's been out to our training facility. You know, a fire marshal like that will work with you. The reality is, you know, the sooner you start, the sooner you'll be complete. Tim wants to comment on that.
I would suggest the one thing you're not going to be happy about is if on December 15th you show up at the fire marshals and say, hey, what do I do now? I think the early approach is best. To your point about how much of the work can be done, it's if this young lady asked me earlier how long it was going to take to get from one phase to the next, if she's already got hers submitted to the fire marshal and you don't have yours written, you're going to be behind that. And I think there'll be a certain amount of leniency to each and every individual that's on each and every fire marshal's desk. If you're the person that's, no lawyers in the room, but lawyered up and said, I'm fighting it, well, good luck, right? On December of 2019, I imagine you're going to get a bill or a visit from the fire marshal, is what I anticipate. I don't think that in any way am I trying to tell you that it's going to be a cost or a threat to you, but I would tell you this, that as a young kid, I was sent to the principal's office all my life, and I said, I'm going right now, I'll take my medicine, and I'll get out. And, you know, I think that's the best approach, is figuring out how to get it done efficiently, inside your budget with the appropriate contractors.
Have you met with Lori? Have you sat down with her?
We talked to her, and we met with that.
Going in the right direction. You're going in the right direction.
My question is, what actually triggers the sprinkler? Is it smoke? Is it fire? Which one is it? And at how much of it? Heat. Okay. And then once it's triggered, how many gallons of water are actually distributed out of one sprinkler head? And is it attached? So let's say we have
only the heads that are affected by the heat. It's not like the movies. The
okay.
systems that are installed in this building, the plate drops at 135. Only the heads that are affected by the heat discharge at about 155 degrees, and then probably about 12 gallons per minute. Every head that goes off. And generally speaking, in a fire like that you would have in a building like this, one head.
Okay, so and is that, are all of these connected to a panel so that when a fire department comes in, they look at the panel, they know exactly where?
Absolutely. So this floor is all fed by a single control valve in a stairwell.
Yeah.
That has a flow switch. That flow switch activates, it enunciates at the fire alarm panel. When the fire department responds, they take a look, first floor flow switch, and you're gonna know the floor of origin, correct.
Okay. In our building, the ceiling of the common hallways where the apartments are is an air conditioning duct.
Okay, air plumbing.
Right. Okay. So how do you install your stuff?
So CPVC is approved in open air plenum. So the reality is it only has a couple restrictions to the returns. So we have a certain.
Well, is it inside the duct or outside the duct?
Not inside the duct, but if you're describing a drywall lid in air plenum, the material that we're using is approved in the air plenum.
What inside of it?
Are you saying that it's an actual duct or is it an actual air plenum?
What's the difference between a duct and an air plenum?
Is it a hard ceiling? Is it a flat ceiling that goes all the way across, or is it a bottom stall?
It runs from.
Okay, so it's in the air. Yeah, it's an air plenum. So it's going to be an air plumber. So our material, is it a hard ceiling? Is it solid all the way across, or is it a ceiling like this? It's paneled. So we simply remove the panel just like we have here, and we work above it. We attach to the concrete structure. We'd either strap it or hang it, and then install the sprinkler heads like you see here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Building is already sprinkled. I'm assuming that when you install in the rest of the common areas, do you tie into the existing sprinkled
What areas
system?
are sprinkled? Maybe some of the trash, plumbing?
Our trash rooms, our storage rooms, our laundry rooms, our mechanical rooms are all sprinkled already.
Depending on how they're fed, they're probably fed off off the domestic system?
No, we have a fire pump.
I think we'd probably look at each individual base. If it's one or two heads here, it's probably just easier to install those one or two heads rather than try to tie in new. If you had an expansive area, or maybe like a trash chute riser, I think that what we would do is probably attach the trash chute riser like we did here, rather than try to go into the vestibule, the 4-hour vestibule, to replace the piping. It would get really expensive. So
if you have the hard piping now, and you're recommending the PVC pipe or
we can tie in the steel to the plastic.
You can tie into those systems.
Absolutely. There's transition.
I know when the engineer came through and did the study, because we do have our estimate or a bid already for the sprinkler system. He thought maybe some of those sprinkler heads that we have are old enough that they would likely need to be replaced.
Replace them, yeah. We're not gonna.
Do we know that ahead of time, or is it?
I think we probably just kind of anticipate that. I mean, we probably take a look at it, and if they're in the same fire area, we probably just go ahead and replace them.
Okay.
It to be a case-by-case basis. We can easily take a look at the proposal and the estimate that we generated, and to be able to take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Water closets
Okay.
were mentioned. Do they also have to be sprinkled?
Not inside the unit, only the HVAC closets, the common, so sometimes what you'll have is an HVAC closet that opens to the corridor.
That's what I'm talking about.
Those would be
Right.
required to be sprinkled. But anything
They
inside.
do have to be sprinkled.
They do, absolutely.
Okay, so then, in our case where we have 2 apartment doors
Plus the HVAC
plus the
closet,
HVAC closet, then we need 3 sprinklers for
correct.
each unit.
Plus the corridor.
Right. Thank you.
And so we had talked about what type pipe. Only the horizontal pipe. Anything from the floor control valve assembly onto the floor is plastic. Any of the vertical feeds or any exposed piping would be steel. So anything that I could grab would be steel. Anything above the ceiling horizontally would be plastic. Any of the vertical feeds, the big 4-inch pipe, all that's steel.
Hey Jeff, we got one over here, Rob, he's got a big mouth.
All right, let's get this meeting over with.
Let's do it.
Let me ask the impossible question.
What are the chance the new governor's gonna knock this thing out of the block?
I don't even think that that's a topic that I'm even willing to address. The reality is, the purpose of this meeting is to talk about, a successful project. I mean, the reality is I could flip a coin, it could go either way. I've been watching this thing for 20 years, so, we're open to clients that have already made that decision, and we're receptive to the opportunity.
In other words, tell me what's happened to Pompano. They haven't received any permits.
She's already my client.
So Jimmy Galloway, that's going to slow you down.
This is a learning process, especially in some of these jurisdictions. So in Fort Lauderdale, you send your report to the fire chief, he reviews, he gives us the approval, and we're good to go, right? Other jurisdictions like Hollywood and Hollandale want that report submitted as a master permit, and then goes through plan review.
They want to treat it like a new construction
Exactly,
project,
almost like a new construction project. And the intent behind it is that way they can track it, because the ELSS is technically a deviation from code. So to go through plan review without having that ELSS report as your master document, you'd have a lot more rejections on what you're trying to approve. So Pompano's just recently kind of got into that, and we're starting to really, as of this week, we've made a lot of traction in moving things forward. The problem is there's about 7 buildings in that pipeline that are all going at the same pace.
Have they released any of them?
I think we're just, with the first 2, we're getting them released now.
Wouldn't be ours, would it?
So we are out of microphone. I can bring this one around. Does anybody have any more questions?
You've done a good job.
Oh, thank you. So again, my name's Rob. My name's Tim. That's Robin, Michael, Jeffrey, Richard, Nova. If you have any questions, we'll be here for a couple minutes. Thank you very much for coming out.